General Business Order for Day number 44, National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill 2010 number 2, second reading, adjourned debate.
Senator Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise this morning to speak on this National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill 2010, which has been brought here by Senator Birmingham as a private member's bill. The bill requires the NBN to prepare a business case for the NBN and the Productivity Commission to prepare a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN. And this is just yet another example of the opposition's absolute opposition to the NBN in any shape or form, and its determination to create as much mischief about the NBN as can possibly happen. It's largely the same bill that Mr Turnbull introduced last year into the House that was voted down on the 19th of November. And now that the bill has been amended in recognition that the government released the NBN corporate plan in December last year, the only thing that this bill now does is to require the Productivity Commission to do a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN by the 1st of December this year. The time frame was ridiculously short when the bill was introduced last year, and again, it just shows that this really isn't a serious bill that the opposition wants to debate, because a proper cost-benefit analysis could never be done in the 3.5 months as this bill requires. It's important too to note that the Productivity Commission does actually have a forward work program and budget, and there's no provision there to support this initiative at this time. Having said that, on the merits of us doing a cost-benefit analysis, we know that on the cost of the side of the ledger, the NBN is an investment. It's not a cost. The corporate plan shows a return on investment of a little over 7%, and we know from the Greenhill-Caliburn report that the assumptions underlying the revenue and cost projections in the NBN corporate plan are reasonable. And on the benefit side, there's also plenty of evidence already. The OECD, the UN, Access Economics all say that investment in high-speed fibre platforms will generate billions of dollars in economy-wide benefits. 2 Access Economic reports that have been released by the government show that the benefits to telehealth on its own in Australia could be between $2 billion and $4 billion a year, and that Australia could save between $1.4 billion and $1.9 billion a year if 10% of the workforce teleworked half the time. And the OECD says, and I quote, "Effective use of high-speed broadband can provide significant improvements in productivity and efficiency across a number of sectors such as energy, health, education and transport." And Mr Deputy President, as someone who's a member of the NBN's Select Committee, I can say that our recent visit to Broken Hill, where we examined the backbone work that's been going on there, and the extent to which the whole community of Broken Hill and the region of Western New South Wales has embraced the concept of the NBN and its potential, really reminds us of the extent to which people are waiting with bated breath to engage with the NBN. And wherever we went in those field visits, people were asking us, when is the NBN coming to us? We identify the potential, particularly around the issues of e-learning, e-health, e-commerce, and we know that the NBN is going to provide those opportunities for many parts of regional Australia. The United Nations says, and I quote from their report, that broadband is the next tipping point, the next truly transformational technology. It can generate jobs, it can drive growth and productivity, and underpin long-term economic competitiveness. And an IBM study in 2009 found that even a fibre-to-the-node network, an inferior network to that we're building here in Australia, would conservatively boost the NPV of GDP by between $8 and $23 billion a year over a 10-year period, and $8 to $23 billion over a 10-year period, and jobs by 33,000 by 2011 in an economy operating at less than full employment. So we can see that there is extraordinary potential for the NBN. This isn't a bill that we should be supporting. It's just a half-hearted attempt to throw up roadblocks to the NBN rollout. As I said, it's another piece of mischief by the opposition who are fundamentally opposed to the NBN and what it represents. The NBN is, as we all know and appreciate, is critical infrastructure. It will connect our rural and regional centres back to our main cities and the wider world with world-class broadband. It's interesting to note how complacent, I suppose, or how accepting people here in Australia are about the speed of their broadband connections. When, if you're travelling overseas, particularly in Asia, they've kind of leapfrogged us and have access to high-speed broadband that and internet connections that we are the envy of us, if we could only imagine that it was so. So for us here in Australia, we are really behind the eight ball in terms of this. The NBN will deliver affordable, high-speed broadband services to all Australian homes, to businesses, to schools, to hospitals, no matter where they're located in Australia. That's the fundamental principle, equity of access. As Australia's first national wholesale-only communication network, the NBN will also support genuine competition in the telecommunications sector for the first time, which has to mean better outcomes for consumers. Right now, what we have is a vertically integrated, privately owned monopolist Telstra, and the NBN will connect 93% of premises in Australia with optical fibre, delivering speeds up to 1 gigabyte per second. That's many, many, many times faster than people experience today. And in fact, the potential of the NBN network is yet to actually even be imagined in some parts of our economy. All remaining premises will receive next-generation wireless and satellite technology, providing speeds of up to 12 megabits per second. So we know absolutely that the NBN will dramatically improve Australia's communications environment, and as I said, Australians are already lining up for those services. There's an overwhelming level of support in communities. The percentage of households who signed up for a fibre connection in the mainland first release sites averaged about 75%, with each site 88% in the first release site near Armidale, 90% in Wollonga, 78% in Kiama Downs, 62% in Townsville and 52% in Brunswick. So people are really hungry for this technology and anticipating its potential and the way in which it's going to improve their lives and improve their opportunities. When the NBN services were officially launched on mainland Australia, in Armidale, a good country town, focused with it as it does on its university community, on the 18th of May. Kiama Downs in Minamurra was only just a few weeks ago, on the 29th of July, and in Brunswick on the 4th of August, actually only a few days after the NBN committee had been there and inspected the extraordinary infrastructure that's been put in place. It really is mind-blowing, and people need to go and see what this infrastructure looks like, how smooth, how unintrusive it is, but also what its potential is. It will transform the way people think about internet access and the World Wide Web. The NBN Co has also commenced construction in 9 of the 19 second release sites that were previously announced by the NBN, and that's going to cover 50,000 premises across Queensland, New South Wales and the ACT. And I did hear yesterday the concerns and the arguments that were raised by Senator Humphries, for example, about the expectations of the people of Gungahlin and people in the ACT. And I think that the point that Senator Humphries was making yesterday about, we've got Transact here and that's a good provider, really doesn't go to the issue of how competition will improve access to services and will reduce the costs over a period of time. So this piece of legislation, as I say, a mischievous piece of legislation, really to bring us here today, has been seriously considered in terms of its lack of effectiveness. We have the viability of the NBN that's been very clearly examined, as I said, by the 2010 McKinsey KPMG implementation study that was released in May last year, and again the 2011 Greenhill Caliburn review of the corporate plan, which was released on the 14th of February 2011. So, based on the conservative assumptions of the NBN corporate plan, it shows that the NBN will support uniform national wholesale prices that will support affordable retail prices. And the plan shows that the Commonwealth's investment will be repaid with a return that exceeds the 10-year bank rate. Greenhill Caliburn found that the key assumptions underlining the revenue and cost projections in the NBN corporate plan were reasonable and sound. And being a viable business in its own right, the NBN will also have broad economic, social, educational and healthcare benefits, as I've said. The rollout of the NBN will be subject to ongoing scrutiny from a joint parliamentary committee, of which I'm a member, and under the Freedom of Information Act. So where we are with this bill is that it is a clumsy case that is about making mischief and slowing down, putting roadblocks up to the NBN rollout. The definitive agreements between Telstra and the NBN Co, announced in June, will also improve the construction process and are providing NBN Co with immediate access to Telstra infrastructure, such as the pits and pipes in the second release sites, and we saw really good examples of that when we inspected those facilities in Brunswick last month. And building on the fibre rollout, on the 3rd of August, the NBN Co also announced the first communities to receive NBN Co's high-speed fixed wireless service. The first to receive the service will be homes and businesses and institutions in the less densely populated rural and remote communities that surround Geraldton in Western Australia, Toowoomba in Queensland, Tamworth in New South Wales, Ballarat in Victoria and Darwin in the Northern Territory. And I know from speaking to my colleagues in the Northern Territory that they are really keen to see that rollout there. Very, very important for the Northern Territory, particularly to have access to improved technology services. Customers will be able to access services over the network which use the latest 4G wireless technology from the middle of next year. So what we are doing now is we're seeing communications often being led by Regional Development Australia or by councils actually preparing their communities to be broadband ready, national broadband ready. And the challenges around doing that are about understanding the potential and the capacity of the national broadband and the way in which it can be used to improve everything, as I say, from e-health and e-commerce through to productivity. In Broken Hill, we saw the way in which the NBN was going to be used to facilitate the establishment of a film studio in Broken Hill, an amazing facility for Broken Hill to be able to really capture the opportunities that are presented. More than 60 films have actually been made in Broken Hill over the years, and it's a very common place used as a base for making advertisements. So, and it was very bad luck that we heard only a little while ago that Mad Max isn't going to be made there because it's too green. But there are many, many opportunities for that film studio to bring a whole arts precinct to Broken Hill in a way that the NBN Co, without the NBN Co, that could not possibly happen. And on the 1st of July, the NBN Co has also launched its interim satellite services, bringing forward the availability of enhanced broadband services for regional Australia. And I did hear yesterday the Minister explaining how the whole of Victoria was actually covered by that process, and particularly around Ballarat and Bendigo. For someone who actually has to use satellite services, I can tell you the frustrations of not having a decent broadband connection. It's very frustrating, it's very expensive, it's not very reliable on cloudy or rainy days, and to make sure that we have and we improve our satellite services in this way is going to be quite critical. So the interim satellite service is going to be available to individuals and small businesses that can't access metro comparable broadband services ahead of the NBN Co's long-term satellite services in 2015. And I'm hoping by then that maybe Goulburn's services might actually extend a little beyond the town boundary and I won't have to be using satellite services anymore. So this bill is a frustrating bill. Yet again, an opportunity to prevent Australians from having world-class affordable broadband service. We've talked long and hard in the Joint Parliamentary Committee around the issues of transparency and scrutiny of the rollout. That is the role of that joint committee, and we have been diligently thinking through the way in which we will be doing our 6-monthly reporting to the Parliament on those issues. And so the government welcomes transparency and scrutiny, but continued analysis and scrutiny of one of the most scrutinised projects ever funded by the government is really without merit. This really is a furphy that the opposition have proposed today. It will certainly add further costs to the rollout, and it will continue to deny high-speed services for all Australians. So the second part of the bill, which requires the Productivity Commission to prepare a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN, is really calculated to delay the NBN, and it follows a pattern that we've seen the opposition use several times in the past. We saw it when we introduced our competition and consumer safeguard legislation in 2009. The opposition didn't want to debate the issue until we produced an ACCC report on the original NBN tender process, and we did that. Then they wouldn't debate the bill until the implementation study was released, and we did that too. So then, when the Competition and Consumer Safeguards Bill was last debated, they filibustered. You will recall they put 19 speakers on the bill, so we couldn't take it to a vote. We've already had a Senate Select Committee into the NBN, which was extended 5 times and produced 5 reports, and the NBN Co's Mike Quigley, the CEO, willingly comes to the Senate estimates 3 times a year. The government has established, as I say, the House of Representatives Committee to examine the benefits of the NBN, and the Joint Committee on the NBN that the government has agreed to establish has been holding public hearings, as I say. We had public hearings most recently in Melbourne and Broken Hill. The Joint Committee has a balanced composition of members from the government, the opposition and the crossbenchers, and a very broad terms of reference. And of course, one of the members of the committee is the Shadows Minister, Mr Turnbull. So Mr Turnbull is getting all of the information that he needs and is seeking to do more through the committee process, which is a much more appropriate way of actually teasing out these issues than seeking to have the Productivity Commission to prepare a cost-benefit analysis in a ridiculously short period of time. So it's pretty hard for me to see how the opposition can continue with its dishonest attempts to portray the government as being anything but open and transparent about the NBN. And as I say, now the opposition wants to legislate for a productivity cost-benefit analysis, but the Shadow Minister has admitted that even if a cost-benefit analysis for the NBN came back unequivocally positive, he refuses to guarantee the opposition's support. So what is it that we're really about here? It's a challenge, and of course we could actually go to the issue of whether there were cost-benefit analysis on some of the opposition's plans, whether it was the Shadow Minister's water plan or whether it was the OPEL regional broadband plan. We were never able to see a cost-benefit analysis about those things. So, Mr Deputy President, in concluding, can I just say that this NBN process has been the most scrutinised and developed, investigated process of recent years that I can ever remember. We really do not need to go yet again to the Productivity Commission to burden them in a time when there is no resources or a time frame for the Productivity Commission in their forward work program. And really the opposition has said, regardless of what the Productivity Commission says anyway, they're not necessarily going to attempt accept their findings. So I'll conclude my remarks there, Mr Deputy President, and suggest that the opposition is yet on another mischievous attempt to delay the NBN.
Thank you, Senator Stevens. Senator Humphries.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. And I see that the government is determined to push ahead with this plan. The government is determined to ensure that the decision that announced a couple of years ago to proceed with a very expensive, very elaborate, very anti-competitive broadband regime for this country should proceed, notwithstanding that this model is one that was put together, in essence, in a very short space of time. We need to remember that the government went to the 2007 election promising to deliver a broadband network that would cost Australians, in terms of public investment at least, something like $5 billion. And it became evident after a time that this scheme was not going to work, that it was incapable of attracting the investment from suppliers and providers necessary to make it work, and accordingly that plan was dumped in favour of a much more ambitious plan, a $50 billion plan. And that plan was put together in a matter of days between the tender process collapsing for the original version and the new one being announced. And in circumstances such as this, the relevance of the government's own promise to the Australian people before the 2007 election that it would not proceed with major government developments or infrastructure projects without a cost-benefit analysis became far more relevant. And this is the granddaddy of all government developments or infrastructure projects, the most ambitious thing Australia collectively has engaged in. And it lacks that very essential prerequisite of a cost-benefit analysis, which Labor itself made such a virtue of advocating for before the 2007 election. And that is why this legislation is before the Senate today, Mr Deputy President. The opposition does not, in any sense, question the need for Australians to have a fast, reliable broadband network that can be accessed by Australians at an affordable price. We do not demur from that goal. But we question whether the government has done the basic homework necessary to assure the Senate, the Parliament, the Australian people, the taxpayer, that there has been the right choice in this network, the national broadband network, over other alternatives. And that is why this legislation calls for the cost-benefit analysis, which the government failed to do. We are implementing your policies with this legislation. We are holding you to the commitment you made to the Australian people back in 2007, because we believe in the fiscal rectitude and the prudent use of the taxpayers' dollars. And we don't think that there is any way that the very much afterthought type exercises this government has engaged in around its implementation of the NBN can be justified as a proper, full, complete cost-benefit analysis of this major project. And that cannot be allowed to stand if the commitment of the Australian people is to stand in the order of $50 billion. Of course, during the last few years of the previous government, the Howard government, moves were underway to deliver high-speed broadband to Australians through the Opel policy. And I've heard criticism that the Howard government came to this position late, but I remind honourable senators that technology has changed so quickly in the period before that decision was made, and continues to change so quickly that it is right to hold back until the best available technology is emerging in the marketplace. And that's exactly what the Howard government did. It planned with Opel to deliver high-speed broadband not in competition with but in cooperation with the private sector, and I believe that that plan would have today delivered broadband, high-speed broadband, reliable broadband to thousands of Australians, in fact millions of Australians who are still waiting for the NBN. Senator Conroy, the Minister, likes to cast the debate in terms of the government's on the side of modernity, the coalition is atavistic, they are grasping the future, we are clinging to the past, but they ignore with those broad statements, those emotional lines, the truth that this investment is of such a magnitude, involved in an area of technology subject to such rapid change, that it is unwise in the extreme, to proceed without every possible check, review, every possible testing of the market that the government might have at its disposal, and ensure by doing so that the Australian taxpayer is fully protected. There are a number of nagging doubts that any observer of the communications market would have to have in looking at the way in which NBN is constructed. For one thing, it is the most expensive possible way to achieve the objective of fast, reliable broadband. It uses the most expensive possible network design, fibre to the home. It makes no use of existing fixed-line last-mile communications infrastructure. In fact, it overbuilds all of that. It is, in that sense, colossally wasteful. It's as if you decided that your kitchen needed to be renovated and your bathroom was in need of a bit of an uplift, and the back porch needed to have the floorboards replaced. So you decided to knock the whole house down and rebuild it. That's the extent and the breadth of the decision that the government has made. Again, it might be the right decision, but we just don't know, because a full cost-benefit analysis of this option versus the alternatives hasn't been done. We know that the NBN is the most anti-competitive way to achieve the objective of building universal access to fast broadband. Senator Stevens said this was competition would exist in the marketplace. Well, in a very real sense, it is not going to exist in the marketplace. The NBN will be a new government-owned monopoly, and all potential direct fixed-line competitors to it will be prevented from competing by legislative or contractual constraints. That's even true for Telstra's HFC pay TV cables, which pass almost a third of all Australian households and could provide NBN-level broadband service almost immediately if the owners were provided with the appropriate incentives and regulatory environment. That's not what's happening. There's no competitive involvement at that level. It is NBN or nothing. It is, in a very real sense, the riskiest available option to the Australian taxpayer. We know that the contracts NBN Co is planning to sign to get the NBN constructed are extremely risky. By shifting to a cost-plus model, NBN Co has shifted a large and unquantified amount of economic risk onto taxpayers. It is taxpayers that are, in the main, liable for any cost blowouts. So much for the government's ridiculous previous claims that 14 major Australian construction companies which failed to meet its price target were colluding in an attempt to gouge taxpayers. Not so. And we know that NBN Co is no longer just a carefully regulated wholesaler providing a last-mile level playing field where other carriers compete, as the government initially promised it would be. Instead, we find it muscling into new activities and displacing private sector rivals in areas as diverse as broadband infrastructure at new housing estates, communications needed by defence agencies, and many services existing carriers sell to large corporations. Mission creep is what's happening here, and it's a very easy thing to occur when you can access money, as much money as you want, at the government bond rate. Again, this concept is changing all the time in scope, in cost, in structure, in leadership as we look at the reshuffle that's going on at the moment. All of these changes demand some rectitude in the overview provided by the government and other regulatory bodies about the way in which it proceeds. To Madam Acting Deputy President, to justify the vast expansion of the public sector and the overturning of decades of bipartisan agreement on the merits of private ownership of business operations, unfettered competition and competitive neutrality between public and private entities, the government points to the economic and social benefits of broadband. Now, on that, there isn't any dispute. Senator Stevens spent a lot of her speech talking about the wonderful things that broadband will do, about film studios in Broken Hill and schools being able to do things they couldn't do before, and e-health strategies and so on. All of that is agreed. But I could come forward to Senator Stevens and describe the wonderful benefits of a Maserati motor vehicle, what great things it can do that an ordinary Holden Commodore can't do, and how much faster it can travel, and how brilliant the wheels are, and what other fantastic things it does. The question that Senator Stevens hasn't asked herself, though, is how much is it going to cost? Is it actually what we need? Can we get from A to B more affordably? And this is a very real point to make, because we know that the biggest impediment to universal internet access in Australia is cost. And it's very largely in lower socioeconomic groups that internet access is least penetrating. And the more elaborate, the more gold-plated, the more expensive the model the government chooses, the more those very sorts of people are going to find it harder to access this new national broadband network. And so to talk about the wonderful things it does is not the point. The question that Australians need to have answered is, how much is it going to cost us? I've no doubt that any particular community you say to, you point to and say, we can roll out this NBN to you, when do you want it? They'll say yes, do it now, and we want it yesterday. But at the end of the day, the question is not what they want now, the question is what they get and how much they're prepared to pay for it. And those are the questions that this legislation would be able to help answer, but which, with opposition from the government, they may not get answered. Madam Acting Deputy President, Senator Stevens referred to the NBN as being a cost, not a cost but a benefit. Well, indeed, in one sense it is, but you cannot divorce the cost from the benefit, and we need to know what those benefits are and how much they'll cost us. She made the point about the NBN being unobtrusive. Now, I referred to my remarks yesterday in the chamber where I said that unobtrusive depends very much on the manner of rollout, and the NBN regime will have the capacity to provide rollout in essence in any way that it wants. And although yesterday we dealt with legislation that provides for the infrastructure to be rolled out in greenfield estates in a way which is, in Senator Stevens' words, unobtrusive, the same guarantee cannot be provided with respect to rollout in existing residential areas of our cities and towns, because NBN essentially is able to override local planning regimes, and the capacity to do great damage to the aesthetics of local communities remain there. And I particularly referred in my remarks to what was happening in the ACT, where we have a long-standing custom of no overhead wires between streetlights or power poles running up our streets, but that may change, could change under NBN. And again, I repeat today my call for the Minister to assure us that that won't occur. And I'd be very happy to receive that assurance and be told that I'm scaremongering, but until I hear it, I'm going to continue to make this point. The fact is that the Labor government has rushed forward to do what it needs to do for political purposes, and the proper assessment and evaluation of alternatives simply hasn't taken place. I note that in 2007, when Mike Quigley was still at Alcatel-Lucent and had to face shareholders who weren't legally required to hand over money at taxpayers' expense, the company put out a white paper titled Deploying Fibre to the Most Economic Point. And not surprisingly, he concluded that it does not always make economic sense to lay fibre all the way to homes in existing networks. In fact, the paper concluded the economics of fibre to the node are hard to resist, given cost points that can be 50% or less than those of passive optical networks. In fact, this very architecture is currently being rolled out across many parts of the world. In the UK, for example, we see British Telecom planning to connect over 6 million households to next-generation fast broadband using fibre to the node, and only 2 million households by fibre to the home. I have to say, Madam Acting Deputy President, it's extraordinary that the Labor government not only has refused to contemplate this architecture for any of its NBN, but it is in the process of signing a deal with Telstra that will actually make such a design far more costly than it needs to be should a future government of either side wish to pursue a more affordable and less disruptive architecture. This is not the way in which a government should lay the foundation for a flexible network capable of adapting to changes in market demand or technology. That is very much not a feature of the NBN. I note that the leadership of the NBN is changing in a way which, to be perfectly frank, doesn't inspire a great deal of confidence. Major changes were announced just yesterday, and some of these are supposed to have been scheduled and planned, but it doesn't look like that. I have to say that I agree with the opposition's communications spokesman, the member for Wentworth, who described the NBN project as chaotic. He said that the NBN Co had already lost 2 senior employees in the construction division after an earlier tender process was abandoned, and it still had to sign construction contracts for many second release sites. He said, and I quote, "This is an organisation which, at last count, had more employees than customers, so the workload can hardly be to blame for the shake-up. It is an organisation employing 47 executives on salaries of more than $300,000 a year, so the NBN Co can hardly claim that it is working in an environment of restrained resources." And those concerns, while not definitive of the problems at NBN, ought to leave Australians in a position of wanting answers. Answers which, of course, they cannot receive because this government has not commissioned the Productivity Commission to do a thorough cost-benefit analysis. And that is the point of the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill 2010. It is to give Australians that assurance that the homework has been done before the money is spent. If anything, the changes of recent days, the changes to scope of the project, changes in leadership, changes in the anticipated cost of the project, all of that lends itself more and more to a full, appropriate arm's-length assessment of what's going on. And for that reason, I think it is imperative for the Senate to consider its responsibilities to the Australian people and ensure that this project gets that analysis. In, I suspect, only a few years' time, it'll be possible for those of us who sit around this chamber at that stage to point fingers, presumably all from one side of the chamber to the other, saying, everything you said about this didn't come true. I hope it's going to be my side of the chamber, but I will know that is pointing to the other side, making that accusation. But I can say, whatever the outcome, I can say with some confidence that at least if a cost-benefit analysis had been done, we wouldn't have had to operate in that field of doubt. We wouldn't have had to proceed on the basis of a wing and a prayer. Let's hope this works. We like the product. Let's see if we can afford it at the end of the day. We think it might be great, but we just don't know. All those questions are unanswered. And at the cost of $50 billion to the Australian people, I don't feel comfortable not being able to answer those questions.
Thanks, Senator Humphries. Senator Ludlam. Madam Acting Deputy President, I'm really pleased to be able to speak on this bill this morning. The Australian Greens won't be supporting it for the same reason that we haven't supported various iterations of identical proposals over the last year or two. I'm glad Senator Birmingham's joined us. Good morning. And I'm wondering, Senator Birmingham, when you rise to speak, whether you could tell us how many times in both chambers of this parliament you've served up a proposition to subject NBN code to a cost-benefit analysis, because I've actually lost track. So whether you could take that one on notice. I admire the perseverance, and I'll just speak briefly about why we won't be supporting this bill. Firstly, to just lay out, we've got nothing against the Productivity Commission. We've got nothing against the instrument of a cost-benefit analysis where it's applied in an appropriate context. In terms of the Productivity Commission, you'll be aware they pop up pretty regularly in the carbon price agreement, performing various studies and checks and balances. We were quite pleased in our agreement with the government to make it more difficult for a future government to sell NBN Co back into the private market, that the Productivity Commission will be the ones doing the analysis of whether it's in the public interest or not to sell the NBN Co in a decade or so's time. So we've got nothing against the PC. The problem, of course, is that applying a cost-benefit analysis to a project such as this, and this has been well canvassed on many occasions, seeing as how the Coalition have bowled it up again, I'm happy to describe again why we think it's the wrong instrument. The costs. How do you assess the costs of the NBN? How do we look at the cost side of the balance sheet? Well, the NBN Co's published its business case. That's been peer-reviewed, and now it's the job of the Joint Standing Committee on the NBN Co, chaired by Mr Rob Oakeshott, of which I'm a member, which was an initiative of Senator Xenophon's, who's just joined us. Now we're tasked with watchdogging the process and the project on a month-by-month basis to keep track of costs. The problem being it's cost positive. It's a business. It provides revenue to the government. So how do we assess what the cost of the project is when in fact it's going to be generating revenue to the government and will in time pay its costs back? So what does Senator Birmingham propose that we put on the cost side of the ledger? On the benefits, the glass is still half full, Senator Birmingham, just as it was last night. On the benefits side, how on earth do you calculate the benefits? Because what you need to do is monetise an entire range of quite intangible propositions about the benefits of the NBN Co, and then add them up, monetise them, add them up for all future benefits for all time of a network that doesn't yet exist, of fast fibre. And I have no idea how the Coalition would propose to do that. But let's say that it was done. You'd then need to provide a sensitivity analysis to show that the variables you threw into the cost side and the benefit side, how they influenced the results that fell out of your spreadsheet. And of course, a sensitivity analysis, if it's done with any degree of honesty and rigour at all, will show you that you can make the benefit side of the equation say pretty much whatever you like, depending on your degree of hostility to the project. Depending on what variables you plug in is what benefits will fall out. If we had done a cost-benefit analysis of the electricity grid, we wouldn't have built it. We wouldn't have built it because you wouldn't have been able to monetise the benefits, but you would have been able to estimate the future cost and go, well, that's going to be expensive. What are the benefits of that going to be? How much should we total up the benefits of having electricity, running water, roads, railways? We wouldn't have built these things. Fortunately, we have a bit of an idea of what a cost-benefit analysis of NBN Co would look like because somebody actually did one. Professor Henry Ergus and his colleagues attempted one in 2009. They presented it to, as it was then, a select committee on the NBN Co. Acknowledged that it was pretty rough. It was a bit back of the envelope, and at least they had a go. And what did it find? The cost-benefit analysis that was done. It found that it was inefficient to proceed with the NBN Co if costs exceed $17 billion. So of all those intangible variables that you plug into the spreadsheet, they decided $17 billion was the figure. There'd be no utility in building the NBN if it cost more than $17 billion to produce. They estimated actually that the costs outweighed the benefits by something in the order of $14 to $20 billion in net present value terms, which means you've got to pay very careful attention to the kind of discount rates that they apply and all the bizarre mathematical formula that they have to come up with to decide what the benefits of this network that doesn't yet exist will be. And of course, that's why we think it's an inappropriate mechanism. We know why the Coalition has been so persistent. It's because they want a rerun of that. They want to be able to stand up and wave around a stack of figures and say, because it costs more than $17 billion, we'd be better off going and spending the money on more roads or more coal-fired power stations or whatever it is that the coalition would prefer to see the public money spent on. I think on both sides of the cost and benefit side of the equation, we would be wasting the Productivity Commission's time, even though it would potentially provide quite a useful political tool to the coalition. There's a second strand of argument that says don't build it because there might be some future technology coming down the road that will make the NBN co obsolete. And I think that's just basic ignorance of the laws of physics. And I wonder how long the coalition would propose that we hang around in that posture. They hung around in that posture for 12 or 13 years. Don't build anything just in case something better comes along. And it kind of beggars belief, I think, that has become the alternate policy position. Don't put in this network because something better might come along. Something better than electricity might come along as well. That's true. Something better than road transport might come along. Something better than reticulated water might come along. But we built that infrastructure, and at some point you have to say it's time to build the infrastructure for the 21st century. Mr Turnbull, by way of alternative, is providing a fibre to the node model that was rejected by the government's expert panel 2 or 3 years ago. He's proposing a diabolically awkward hybrid model that I think will lead us straight back into the swamp of policy paralysis that we spent most of the term of the Howard government in. The coalition, when they did hold the Treasury benches and the government benches, told us, against the will of just under half of the numbers in the chamber in this parliament, that all we had to do was privatise the national carrier and the market to take care of everything. Well, how well did that work out? You sold a vertically integrated state-owned monopoly into the market and then walked away and watched it as it squashed its competitors and leveraged its monopoly power into new markets. And that is why it is so important that this parliament took the step that it did late last year to disaggregate Telstra, to separate out the wholesale arm so that NBN Co can get on with the build-out and actually repair some of the damage that was caused when Telstra was flogged. I do occasionally feel a little bit sorry for Senator Birmingham and indeed for the member of Wentworth, because these are MPs who are technologically literate. They use the technology, they know how it works, they know of the benefits. Unlike Mr Abbott and some of the trolls that get sent in here, get wheeled out to just run the party line to destroy the NBN and wreck it, I think the people who represent through Senator Birmingham and the member for Wentworth must sometimes lie awake at night wondering how on earth it is that they've been tasked with wrecking this project. It still beggars belief that the National Party get wheeled in here every now and again to try and ruin a proposal to bring rapid, world-class broadband to regional areas. I have no idea how their party room accommodated that point of view. Somehow they've managed, and they've come in here to try and smash this thing up. So I've, to be completely honest, had enough with the trolling of the project, because that's what it's become. And some of the arguments have really become pretty marginal. I think the member for Wentworth is doing a reasonably good job under direction of a technologically illiterate leader of the opposition to at least try and condition some of the arguments to a degree to provide the watchdogging that this project badly needs. But I think some of the arguments are so way off beam that they should simply be dismissed. We tend to be a little bit inward-looking in Australia, and I think that's going to be one of the benefits of the project, actually, is that it'll hook us up with the rest of the planet as it comes online. But let's just for a moment take a look at what some voices are saying about the project from outside the fishbowl of Australian politics. Dr. Vince Cerf, who along with the team of scientists is said to have invented the internet in the 1970s, so one of the real pioneers of the technology, who was awarded the US National Medal of Technology and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Here's what he said about the NBN. I am so envious that you have a government that's willing to make the long-term infrastructure investment of this magnitude and of this type. I'll be pushing very hard for similar activities in the US, but quite frankly, you guys are way ahead of us. And of course, as the United States teeters ever closer to bankruptcy, Australia, I think, will be in a position to get further ahead. He says, I consider this to be a stunning investment in infrastructure that, in my view, will have a very long-term benefit. Infrastructure is all about enabling things, and I see Australia is trying to enable innovation. So that's a reasonably positive report from Vince Cerf. Eric Schmidt, who senators might know as the CEO of Google, has said Australia is leading the world in understanding the importance of fibre. Your new Prime Minister, as part of her campaign, and now as part of her Prime Ministership has announced that roughly 93% of Australians will have gigabit or equivalent service using fibre, and the other 7% will be handled through wireless services of the nature of LTE. This is leadership, again from Australia, which I think is wonderful. Now, of course, he's in the technology sector, and he's probably got a direct interest, you'd say, in world-class rapid broadband in Australia. But still, I think if they thought the project was a dud, they'd be saying so. Since opposition senators frequently wheel in motor vehicle metaphors, I'm just interested in this one that I spotted from Jim McCurley, who said the opposition is saying the proposal is like building a Bentley when we can only afford a Commodore. The trouble with aiming to just build a Commodore is that you'll probably end up with a go-kart. I don't think we can afford to end up with that. Mr Paul Budde, who's given evidence at many of the inquiries that have tracked this project since its inception, is the managing director of one of the world's largest telco research and consultancy firms. Here's what he said. There are many countries who at this point in time cannot afford to make this investment, and this gives Australia the chance to leap ahead and give the people and businesses of our country a head start in the digital economy. Think about what that can do for job creation and productivity. Alan Kohler said not only will the NBN not be a white elephant, it will almost certainly prove to be a great investment. It could represent on its own a huge national savings plan. I don't know how you fit that into a cost-benefit analysis. When it's finished, the asset will be worth several times the government's investment of $27.5 billion. Of course, that's why the Australian Greens, one of the reasons why the Australian Greens believe that this project shouldn't be privatised to repeat the mistakes of the full privatisation of Telstra. It should remain in public hands, where we can get the directors of the company in front of estimates committees to be cross-examined by people like myself and Senator Birmingham and ask what they're doing with taxpayers' money. I don't often quote the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but I'm going to this morning. The ACCI Peter Anderson CEO said the instinct in the business community is that there can be a real productivity kick and benefit, which to me seems like common sense. The Executive Director of Australia's peak body representing the interests of small business, COSBOA, said the NBN is an equal playing field. You don't get that too often. We want it, we need it. So I don't really understand to what constituency the Coalition is speaking when they bowl up in here, either with well-meaning sounding amendments like proposals for cost-benefit analysis, or some of the more elaborate attempts at sabotaging and bringing the project down that we've seen over the last 18 months or so. I don't understand who the constituency is. I think it's high time we simply got on not just with building the project, but our role as senators in this parliament is to make sure that it doesn't cost any more than it needs to. We can do that in this chamber, we can do it in estimates committees, we can do it in the joint NBN committee, which Mr Oakeshott chairs, which I think is the perfect forum for identifying problems and tracking the rollout of the project. I look forward to the network coming to Western Australia. If I have any criticism for the NBN project, and it certainly hasn't been perfect as any project with the degree of risk, the scale of the investment and the scale of the rollout as this project, there certainly will be risks attached to the project. It's running probably a year behind schedule, and that is partly the fault of this chamber and the Coalition's blocking tactics. When we had Senator Minchin, the member for Telstra, or the Senator for Telstra, running an elaborate series of blocking tactics to prevent the chamber from even debating the legislation, Coalition member for Brisbane, Teresa Gambaro, obviously takes a different point of view. She was complaining that the NBN should be rolled out in her electorate, and that's the degree of my complaint. When's it coming to Fremantle? When's it coming to Kalgoorlie? When's it coming to Albany? I would like to see this network rolled out. I would like to see this parliament doing its job in watchdogging the proposal and making sure that it's a smooth build. And I wonder whether Senator Birmingham, when he rises to speak, can maybe tell us whether this is the last time that we'll see an amendment such as this.
Thanks to Senator Ludlam. Senator Cameron.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I must say I agree with the bulk of Senator Ludlam's position here this morning, but I don't agree with Senator Ludlam in relation to the position the member for Wentworth, Malcolm Turnbull, is taking in the NBN. Malcolm Turnbull is there simply doing what his leader has told him to do, and that is to destroy the NBN. I've got to say, I find it quite interesting that the former leader of the Liberal Party, Malcolm Turnbull, who is supposed to be the great business expert and the great technological expert in the coalition, has allowed himself to be bullied by one of the biggest bullies in town, that is the Leader of the Opposition, Tony Abbott. And I think it's about time, I think it's about time, and Senator Birmingham has interjected. Senator Birmingham, I think your position is even worse than Malcolm Turnbull's, because it's clear what Senator Ludlam says. You profess to understand what the technology will deliver. You profess to be a modern, forward-thinking Liberal. I think that's an oxymoron, by the way. I don't think there is such a thing. And you profess to understand these issues, yet you are part of the team. Now, you don't have to get too snaky about it, Senator Birmingham. You are part of the team that is set out to try and destroy what is one of the best and most innovative and economically responsible projects ever undertaken in this country. You see, yeah, it's not hard to make you laugh, Senator Birmingham, because you should be laughing at yourself. Your lack of commitment to the future of this country is clearly on display. And we now have, we now see what, here's another one of the team just walked in, Senator MacDonald. Senator MacDonald said, we'll hear all the arguments from Senator MacDonald, all the ranting and raving from Senator MacDonald, but he has obviously not spoken to Mrs Gambaro, who wants the NBN in Queensland. He has actually said in some of the Senate hearings that he's got complaints from some of the regional sectors in Queensland that they are not going to achieve and not going to have the NBN. I mean, the NBN is something that the coalition could never have delivered, could never have thought about it. Because why? They are a policy-free zone. A policy-free zone. All they are wreckers. All they are is about negativity. All they are about is a mad scramble for government. And they just cannot get over it that the Australian public would not put them in, that they were not trusted enough to get a majority at the last election. So they will do anything, they will say anything, they will prostitute their values, the little values that they have, to push forward and try and destroy the NBN. And what are we doing? We as a government are setting about to deliver significant improvements in broadband service with a quality service to all Australians, something that the coalition did not have the capacity to do in 11 and a half years. I'm not sure how many, I wasn't here at the time, and I'm not sure how many failed broadband policies you had. I think it was the last count, something like 20. And what did you do? You allowed Sol Trujillo and his team to stand over you. It showed how weak you were as a government, where these imported chief executives came here and stood all over you, demanded that you lay off Telstra, demanded that you allow them to do whatever they like. And what did you lot do? You capitulated. You capitulated to Telstra. You didn't have the fortitude to actually deal with them. You could not deal with them. They stood over the top of you. It's a bit like what's happening to Senator Abetz at the moment, where he's being stood over in the Liberal Party by other Liberals who don't agree with him. So there is no leadership from the Liberal Party in their internal politics, and no leadership in the national politics. Steve Chobo standing over, the leader of the Liberals in the Senate. It's just a disgrace. But what we are trying to achieve is this significant broadband services, and addressing the lack of high-speed broadband in Australia, particularly outside the metropolitan area. And, you know, we hear so much from the National Party about their rhetoric about the bush, but they've delivered nothing in the bush over the years. What the federal government has done is do more for regional development than in our time in government than the coalition could ever have contemplated and didn't do over 11 and a half years. And we are doing more. We are doing lots more. Absolutely no capacity to deliver to the bush, and it's been left to a Labour government to deliver to the bush, to deliver broadband into the bush. And, you know, and Senator MacDonald laughs. Senator MacDonald laughs. You know, Senator MacDonald's the guy who comes in. The only thing I've got in common with Senator MacDonald, I have to say, is the tie this morning for the Cancer Council. That's about it. That's about it. Senator MacDonald, you raise your heritage. Well, I'm not sure there's too many highly conservative McDonalds in Scotland. If you were trying to be a politician in Scotland, my friend, you would never be a politician, because we know in Scotland, we know what the Conservatives do in Scotland. And if you say to people in Scotland, I'm not sure if you've ever been there, that I'm a Conservative politician, they would look at you aghast. You're a disgrace to the McDonalds, an absolute disgrace to the McDonalds. The McDonalds actually in Scotland stand up for working class people. They stand up for people's rights, not like you standing up for big business. Standing up for big business. McDonald, you're a disgrace to the McDonald's, Senator MacDonald. So don't you lecture me about heritage. You know, don't you lecture me about heritage. No. Look, I'm not going to enter into a debate with Senator MacDonald, but I'll tell you on Scottish heritage, which you would know very little of. You know, my position is quite clear. That if you want to do something decent for this country, you deliver the NBN. You deliver the NBN. You know, what did Tony Abbott say? Tony Abbott said that he wanted to destroy the NBN and that Malcolm Turnbull would be in there to do it. Well, that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the negativity of the coalition, no policies and no ideas and no capacity to actually ever deliver a decent idea other than negativity in this chamber. And, you know, and I certainly won't be lectured by Senator MacDonald, who came into the chamber the other night and was waxing lyrically about Alan Jones and his 8,000 demonstrators out in front of Parliament House. I think I've seen somewhere between 800 and 2,000, a maximum. The best you got was 2,000. I reckon it was about 800. Now, you know, I don't go down, Senator MacDonald, to listen to Alan Jones. The other arch bully, Alan Jones, the other arch bully, out there trying to bully journalists, out there trying to say to journalists, you know, you do what I tell you or you shut up. You know, Alan Jones is not an example of the common decency of Australians. Alan Jones, the leader of the wreckers out there, calls himself a broadcaster, whatever that is, a broadcaster, so that he can actually mislead people. No need to deal with the truth. Just say what you like. Just tell lies. Just tell, put misinformation out there to the public. So that's the type of leadership that's out there. And Senator MacDonald came in here all excited. You know, he'd got his youth back. He was a little puppy dog. The tail was wagging. Out there with 8,000 people out there bringing the government down. It was a pathetic performance. But for somebody, who operates the way Senator MacDonald operates, well, I'm not, that's nothing unusual. So first of all, what we need to learn from this is that Senator MacDonald cannot count. Senator MacDonald cannot count. He's a bit like, a mini version of the whole Liberal Party. They can't count. They can't get their books right. $10 billion at the last election, they couldn't get their budget right. Now they've got $70 billion that they've got to find, and part of that will be at the expense of projects that actually help this nation. Projects like the NBN. Projects that will deliver benefits right across the country. So what people need to understand is when you've got people that can't count, like Senator MacDonald, when you've got a leader of the opposition like Tony Abbott, who actually, in his first decision on economics, puts Barnaby Joyce in as the finance spokesperson and then has to sack him, or Senator Joyce, I'm sorry, puts Senator Joyce in as the finance spokesperson and then has to sack Senator Joyce a few weeks later because not only was he incomprehensible, not only couldn't he develop policy, but he was bringing any remnants of this so-called liberal economic prowess down. Well, I don't believe in the liberal economic prowess anyway. I've said in this place many times that Peter Costello was the most overrated treasurer this country has ever had. He was overrated and he underdelivered and he had no backbone. And he had absolutely no backbone. He couldn't stand up to John Howard. Even when John Howard was tottering on the brink of getting out of Parliament, Costello couldn't bring himself to actually stand up for his own position. And what did Peter Costello leave us? He left us with one of the lowest productivity. He left us with one of the lowest productivity figures in the OECD. He left us with no research and development of any capacity. He didn't have the guts to be able to deliver on climate change. He was just pathetic and overrated. But I have to tell you, that the opposition have just lost the plot completely. I believe they were economic incompetence when they were in power. It was simply about the money rolling in and the money rolling back out. No planning for the future. Absolutely no planning for the future. Economic incompetence. And, Senator MacDonald says I'm killing him with his laughing. Well, he can laugh on because that's the truth of the matter. That is the absolute truth of the matter. An incompetent government for 11 and a half years who had no idea, couldn't deliver on the NBN. The only argument they could put up to try and improve productivity in this country was work choices. And Senator MacDonald supported work choices. Senator Birmingham supported work choices. Senator Birmingham, the brave, new, future look of the coalition. What people need to understand with Senator Birmingham is that he voted consistently for work choices. The only way that... you voted consistently. That was your argument outside the Parliament. Your argument was you would go for it. You would do anything. And you still support work choices now, don't you? You support work choices now. We hear all the arguments from you about labour flexibility. We hear all these arguments about the need for labour flexibility. And what does that mean? Rip away penalty rates. Rip away workers' penalty rates. Take away their annual leave loading. We know what it's all about. Give them no rights. Sack them. Sack them whenever the boss wants to sack them. This is really what the coalition's about. No wonder the coalition were described as mean, tricky and nasty by their own people. No wonder they were described as mean, tricky and nasty. But what we want to do is get a national broadband network up. And why do we want to do it? Because people like the Group of Eight, that's a coalition of leading Australian universities, said this. They said the high-speed broadband network provides the capacity for distant doctors or patients, or midwives for that matter, to have real-time interactions with specialist colleagues in an urban setting if they need it. Broadband connectivity allows clinicians, wherever they are, to engage in things like grand rounds. Where patients of interest are discussed in teaching hospitals, people who are not physically in that building can connect in real time and participate in the questions and answers. It can take years to get thousands of people in a normal randomised controlled trial. We can do online automated randomised control trials with people in their houses in a few months. So this is the group of 8. This is a coalition of Australian universities who say, here are the possibilities of the NBN. And let me just mention one other group. I'll mention a couple actually. But the Coalition of Small Business Organisations of Australia. These are the people that the coalition say that they stand up for. We stand up for small business. So when they're trying to destroy the NBN, just let me remind you what the Coalition of Small Business said to the Senate inquiry. There are 2.4 million small businesses. They are diverse. But I think I can say with confidence that the greater bulk of them want this, and that is access to affordable high-speed broadband for competitive reasons as much as anything. The other group of people that are really fascinating are women on farms. I have seen a few of them use the internet quite well to sell products. I know one young man in manufacturing and selling golf clubs online and doing quite a good job of it. So small business understand the benefits of the NBN, even if the so-called champions of small business, the coalition, have got not a clue about the benefits of the NBN. And then we go to education. And the Association of Catholic School Principals of New South Wales said this: e-learning is truly already a reality in our schools. We have moved from paper to e-books, to personalised learning, and now to e-publishing in a relatively short time. Scalability is necessary to allow us to continue to grow, as I have said, and to provide 21st century skills. I'll be interested to hear Senator McDonald's arguments on scalability. He probably doesn't know what it is. Our school cannot meet the needs of the 21st century learner with 20th century infrastructure. Hence, the broadband is so important to us. Students are, as we know, the very greatest asset we have. The children of Australia, we believe, deserve an education that enables them to be global citizens of the 21st century. The 21st century classroom is currently grinding to a 20th century halt without fast, reliable access to the internet. We dream of the possibilities for our children and believe that national broadband really does have the potential to make some of these dreams a reality for our students. So this is the Association of Catholic School Principals of New South Wales, who were effusive in their support for the national broadband network. And why wouldn't they be? Because it is correct that it's about bringing new technology to how we deal with health, how we deal with education, how we deal with doing business in this country. And if the coalition were half reasonable about this, they would actually be saying, let's get on and build this. Instead of running these nonsense arguments about cost-benefit analysis that is just so much of a nonsense. And we had, Optus appear before the inquiry that I was chairing, Mr. Krishnapalli. And this is what he said. Mr. Krishnapalli is one of the key executives in Optus. He said this: there are probably a few things in there when he was responding to Senator Fisher. You know Senator Fisher? It said, the first thing is, I am personally of the view that in a decade's time, we will be looking back and wondering what all the fuss was about. Because the connection of broadband to every home and every business and the capacity that it will enable, in my view, will lead to a flourishing of business opportunities and applications that we cannot forecast today. I know it is a difficult equation to add into any cost-benefit analysis. So what Optus is saying, you can't do cost-benefits analysis on the potential of the national broadband network. There's so much untapped potential there. There are so many unknowns. And Senator Ludlam outlined what the OECD is saying about it, what other businesses are saying about it. It is the way of the future, and the coalition are the party of the past.
Thank you, Senator Cameron. Senator McDonald.
Madam Acting Deputy President, this is a debate on the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill. And as a debate, I should debate some of the comments made by the two previous speakers. And I say to both of them, and this distresses me a bit because I'm not usually into personal denigration, but for both Senator Ludlam and Senator Cameron, if you want to get into the personal attacks, then you'll get it back double from me. And you will, of course, won't want to wait round to hear it, Senator Cameron. Typical of you and your union bullies who run the Labor Party, you throw the spears and then escape before anyone else can have a say. Now, Madam Acting Deputy President, can I first turn to the contribution, I'll call it. It was hardly a contribution by Senator Ludlam. And if you ever needed any evidence of who's running this country, you only had to see the apologist line that Senator Ludlam took in his speech. Everything the Labor Party did was good, everything the coalition did was bad. And Senator Ludlam, because he has a little knowledge, well, in fact, I'm sorry, Senator Ludlam, none of us on the committee, none of us in this chamber share your very high level of intellect and intelligence when it comes to telecommunications matters. I'm sorry about that, Senator Ludlam. Please forgive us that we don't have all your intelligence and intellect as you were telling us in your speech, but some of us do try to struggle by. But Senator Ludlam told us with his superior knowledge how the Labor Party has been doing everything right. Clearly, Senator Ludlam falls into the same category as Labor Party people who, when it comes to spending other people's money, they are first-class masters at it. They and socialists around the world find it easy to tax ordinary, hard-working Australians, to collect their money and then waste it on the stupidity of the pest projects of socialists like Senator Ludlam and Senator Cameron. Now, Senator Ludlam couldn't understand how you would work out the costs in calculating a cost and a benefit analysis, which this bill actually calls for. And Senator Ludlam, with his great intellect, must wonder how the Productivity Commission has worked out costs on everything they do cost analysis benefits on. He must wonder how Infrastructure Australia can do cost-benefit analysis on all of the things they do costs on. I could actually tell Senator Ludlam the costs of this white elephant that Senator Conroy has established, the NBN. It is $55 billion plus at the moment and increasing by the day. You don't have to be terribly clever, Senator Ludlam, to work that out. All you've got to do is go back and have a look at the history of what the Labor Party's promised in relation to the cost of building this white elephant, and then actually add up what they've actually spent. You remember they had that tender process halfway done when they pulled it all, at a cost of, what was it, I forget the exact figure, $20 million. Then they didn't know where to go. This is a couple of years after they'd been elected to implement some sort of NBN. A couple of years later, they have this $25 million assessment by McKinsey's of what they should do and how they should do it. The money just rolls out. This is before they even turned a sod on what was happening. So just add up the cost and the continuing cost, Senator Ludlam, and you'll get some idea of the cost of this. And then he says you can't work out the benefit of something like the NBN. Well, gee, the Productivity Commission, Infrastructure Australia, can work out the benefit of other bits of infrastructure like rails and roads and school halls, all of this sort of thing. You can work out the benefits. Why does Senator Ludlam, with all his great intellect, think that the Productivity Commission couldn't actually work that out? These are very professional people who are skilled at doing cost-benefit analysis, I'm quite sure they could do it. Senator Ludlam says, look, don't worry about cost-benefit, you've got this NBN committee to oversight it. Well, Senator Birmingham's on it, Mr Turnbull, Senator Fisher, myself, Senator Xenophon, a number of other people all involved in that. Sure, we can oversight it from this chamber or from the committee rooms, but unless you can get in and get the figures and do the clinical and professional analysis that are needed, you'll never be able to get the same sort of result as a proper cost-benefit analysis that this bill calls for would provide. Now, Madam Acting Deputy President, both to Senator Ludlam and to Senator Cameron, can I remind them that had the Coalition won the 2007 election, there would have been a very high-speed national broadband network up and running now and providing benefits for Australia. And yet, under Senator Conroy's model, the Labor Party model, the Greens model, we are still flailing around trying to get this network rolled out. Madam Acting Deputy President, Senator Ludlam went on to quote a handful of people who all said Julia Gillard was great and that the NBN was fantastic and Senator Conroy knew what he was doing. Well, I don't think they actually said the bet. I'd better not exaggerate there. But when we give the details of all of those industry and telecommunications experts, both within Australia and right around the world, who run profitably multi-billion dollar networks, we are told by the Greens and the Labor Party, oh yes, but don't take any notice of them. They're just profit-seeking individuals. So it's okay to use the quotes and the references that Senator Ludlam wants, but with others that don't agree with them. I mean, it's typical of the Labor Party and the Greens. If you don't agree with them and their ideas, you should be completely ignored. Madam Acting Deputy President, Senator Ludlam also said that it doesn't. The Parliament can work out, and the Greens can work out that government infrastructure projects don't cost more than they should. Well, Senator Ludlam, how did you go with the pink bats proposal? You know, the one where you supported the Labor government to put in $14 billion worth of pink bats and then paid another $4 or $5 billion to pull them all out again. Great oversight from the Parliament you provided on that. And what about the school halls? This Parliament was oversighting that. We have example after example of waste and corruption in the spending of government money. And then Senator Ludlam's best effort, I think, was then to blame the Coalition for the fact that Senator Conroy couldn't roll out his NBN network. Well, I mean, you can really see where the Greens are scraping the bottom of the barrel to try and prop up their mates in the Labor Party when they come at that. This proposal, since the 2007 election, has been one series of disasters and confusions after the other, all caused, I might say, by Senator Conroy and his mates in the Green. Madam Acting Deputy President, Senator Ludlam's contribution, and as I say, I inadvertently call it that, is, with respect, not worth the paper it's written on. Senator Cameron spent all but the last 3 minutes of his speech talking about matters that had absolutely nothing to do with the NBN bill. And I think that just demonstrated Senator Cameron's abject ignorance of the NBN and telecommunications. I might say, Senator Cameron, and because this is debate, I will respond. I shouldn't, but I will. He started talking about bullies, or boolies as he was calling them, and spoke about Mr Abbott being a bully. Well, now, coming from someone like Senator Cameron, who as a union boss was renowned for his bullying tactics, I suggest he should go and ask former Senator George Campbell about Senator Cameron's bullying tactics. You might recall it was Senator Cameron who not only supported Ms Gillard when she stabbed Kevin Rudd in the back, but he probably invented that sort of approach when he stabbed former Senator George Campbell in the back all that time ago. And if Senator Cameron wants to talk about bullies or bullies, perhaps he could give us a commentary on what his New South Wales Labor colleague Craig Thompson did when he was another union heavy. I mean, I don't enter into that debate except to repeat what I saw on Late Line last night by the current General Secretary of the Health Services Union, who said that there is $100,000 missing. $100,000 missing. And she was indicating that she was very concerned that low-paid workers who pay their contributions to the unions in good faith to get the unions to support them in their wage claims, in their industrial conditions, should have that money being wasted on, well, we don't know what. We'll await the outcome of police prosecution. Suffice it to say to Senator Cameron, when he is attacking the coalition, he should be careful about the words he uses, and I'd suggest to Senator Cameron that he should use any other word in this week than accusing the opposition of prostitution. And Senator Cameron, you would do well to curtail your language. I'm sorry the chair didn't draw that to your attention. Senator Cameron then went on to a bit of a discourse, a confused and dishonest discourse, as with most of his contributions, on some Scottish heritage. Well, you know, my recollection, Senator Cameron, is that the Camerons were part of the Campbell clan, which joined with the English King William to slaughter the MacDonalds at Glencoe. You know, the MacDonalds bought in the Campbells, bought them in. Well, I didn't raise the issue of Scottish heritage. The MacDonalds bought in the Campbells, succoured them, gave them shelter and comfort for a couple of weeks. In the middle of the night, on the word from the English King William, the Campbells up and slaughtered the MacDonalds at Glencoe. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Camerons weren't part of that as well. Senator Cameron, talking about bullying, will well remember the night outside an Estimates Committee hearing when he was challenged on a ruling. There was some discussion. Senator Cameron tried his old bullying tactics. They didn't work with the committee. He then said, well, we're going to shut down the estimates and have a private meeting. We did. He then came outside, confronted me nose to nose, wanting, I suggest, for me to hit him, but I've been around too long to fall for that old trick, Senator Cameron. But he couldn't help himself. You know, the old foot on the toe, stand on the toe trick, which I'm sure Senator Cameron was pretty good at. Sure, he was pretty good at when he was doing his bully boy tactics in the union movement. Doesn't quite work in this chamber, Senator Cameron, so keep your feet to yourself next time. Now, he then spent a lot of his speech denigrating one of Australia's most respected, able and highly regarded broadcasters and commentators, Mr Alan Jones. He then, put yourself, Senator Billy, put yourself against Mr Jones for honesty, integrity, ability, capability and interest in Australia, and I'll back Alan Jones any time of the week. Put yourself, Senator Billick, against Alan Jones on what he has contributed to the nation as opposed to what you've contributed to the nation, and I will back Alan Jones any day of the week. And can I say to you, 90% of the rest of Australia would at the same time. Now, Senator Cameron then went on to denigrate those honest, hard-working Australians who came from all over Australia to make their point of view known. I mean, Senator Cameron and his mate Bob Brown attacked the gathering, the peaceful gathering out the front. Senator Brown saying the the convoy, the demonstration wasn't much good because, quote, Senator Brown hasn't blockaded anything. Now, Senator Cameron, if he wants to get into this sort of stuff, look, this is not what I usually do. It distresses me to be involved in this sort of debate, but I am debating the sort of things Senator Cameron raised. But if he wants to get into that, why don't you go back and have a look at your mate Senator Brown's record and see how he got on with the police in some of his demonstrations. You might also trawl along the front bench of the Labor Party in this chamber and see if you recognise any current senior minister who might have been out the front of the Parliament House before that person was in Parliament, knocking down the front door of Parliament House, which had to be repaired at a substantial cost to the Australian taxpayer. You might want to have a look at that before you start accusing others, law-abiding Australians, on not knowing how to properly make their point. Sure, law-abiding Australians from regional Australia don't come and get arrested by the police. They don't knock down doors of Parliament House. They try to get their message across to a uncaring, arrogant government, and because they don't get arrested or break some doors, they're called a convoy of no consequence. And Madam Acting Deputy President, can I just... I can't...
draw your attention to the bill we're debating, Senator McDonald.
I'm debating Senator Cameron's comments, Madam Chair. It's not the way I would usually like to debate this because it's filled with personal invective, and that's not me. But if they lead with their chin, they'll get it back double. And then he sort of, I sought the chair's protection. Senator Cameron was trying to kill me with laughter when saying that Peter Costello wasn't a good treasurer. Peter Costello left this country $60 billion in credit and turned a $96 billion deficit left by the last Labor government into this $60 billion credit over a space of 11 years. And Senator Cameron says he was a hopeless treasurer, Rain Swan's a beauty. You know, not only has he spent the $60 billion, he's given us deficits every year he's been treasurer. We now have a total debt of something in the vicinity of $150 billion and increasing by millions of dollars each day. And to suggest that Peter Costello was an economic illiterate just doesn't bother any further comment. Madam Acting Deputy President, this bill tries to put some financial responsibility on this totally irresponsible government, a government that is irresponsible generally, but particularly irresponsible when it comes to financial management. You can, Senator Ludlam, do a cost-benefit analysis. The Productivity Commission, the Infrastructure Australia do it every day of the week. What Senator Ludlam and Senator Cameron and their mates in the Greens and the Labor Party don't want to be demonstrated to the Australian public yet again is that this government is totally incompetent and corrupt when it comes to financial management. A proper analysis that this bill calls upon would even more clearly show to the Australian public, that this NBN is a financial white elephant. Madam Deputy President, I conclude again by repeating, as I will continue to repeat, that had the coalition proceeded with its plans in 2007, Australia would have had a very fast broadband network up and running today. We still wouldn't be, as we are under Labor, thrashing around trying to put all the pieces in place after the event in getting this white elephant on the way. Madam Acting Deputy President, this is a good bill. It deserves support. Clearly, with the Greens and the Labor Party yet again getting together, it's going to struggle to get through. But notwithstanding that, I would hope that some of the Labor senators would see the sense and vote for the bill.
Your time has expired. Senator Billick.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President, and thank Canvas that the time's expired. Senator Birmingham, I think he should be embarrassed to move the second reading of this private senator's bill. If I were him, I'd be ashamed to admit to even a skerrick of responsibility for this tripe that's barely worth the paper it was written on. He waxes lyrical as if he's some kind of virtuous defender of truth and freedom, but he's not a freedom fighter. He's not a fighter for financial transparency. He's a shadow boxer. In fact, it would be fair to say that Senator Birmingham is to financial transparency what Port Adelaide are to kicking goals. And if Senator Birmingham was serious about financial transparency, why would this bill be drafted as it had been, scrawled on a piece of paper somewhere? Senator Birmingham has presented this shambolic bill to the Parliament for one reason and one reason only. The Coalition are opposed to the National Broadband Network. Let's not forget that when Tony Abbott appointed Malcolm Turnbull as the opposition's communications spokesman, Mr Turnbull's riding orders were to demolish the NBN. In other words, demolish the promise of high-speed optic fibre, wireless and satellite broadband across to all Australians. Demolish the revolution in health, home and community care, education, social inclusion, entertainment, business and commerce that will ultimately result from this nation-building project. Demolish the opportunity to break Telstra's monopoly and deliver true telecommunications competition to Australian consumers. And demolish any chances that telecommunications consumers in rural and regional Australia have of getting access to fast, affordable, world-class broadband services. That is what this bill is about: demolition. It's another plank in Tony Abbott's campaign to take a wrecking ball to services in Australia, just like his plans to dismantle GP super clinics, trade centres and any meaningful response to tackling climate change. It's just another stunt, another delaying tactic in their desperate bid to stop progress on the rollout of the NBN. They want as few Australians as possible to get access to this network because they know that when the possibilities of the NBN are realised, the opposition will be revealed as the Luddites they are, rather than the champions of financial transparency that they pretend to be. I struggle to hear in any of the contributions of those opposite what their objection is to affordable, fast broadband. It seems to me that their only basis for opposing the NBN is their shame for their own failure to realise the economic and social opportunities it represents. And it makes me wonder if they really understand the technology at all. If you asked any member of the Coalition, they'd probably tell you that broadband is found on a hat, fibre to the home is what you get when you return from the local store with your favourite breakfast cereal, and a megabit is what you place in the mouth of an extremely large horse. Should we be surprised that these anachronistic Neanderthals would want to demolish the NBN? Mr Abbott and the Liberal National Coalition have a one-word vocabulary when it comes to their response to the rollout of nation-building projects, and that word is no. Their penchant for predicting gloom and doom when Labor puts forward a major nation-building project is a tradition that has been handed down through generations of coalition caucuses. For example, when the Labor government in 1992 introduced the superannuation guarantee, the coalition opposed it, predicting that it would not provide ongoing security for retirees and would result in mass job losses across the country. The sky was going to fall. Instead, compulsory super has raised over $1 trillion in capital for investment in Australia and has dramatically reduced the government's liability for aged pensions. In 1973, when the Whitlam government proposed the health insurance bill setting up the Medibank scheme, now known as Medicare, the opposition referred to it as a socialist scheme that would destroy private hospitals, consume the resources of the country and would lower the standards of health care in Australia. The sky was going to fall yet again. The Medicare system has now developed into a cost-effective public system that provides universal health care to Australians regardless of their means. True to their form, we have a Liberal National Coalition opposition that now says no to every positive proposal that is put forward to build the prosperity of our nation. No to the economic stimulus which saved Australia from recession and projected 200,000 jobs. No to trade training centres and GP super clinics. No to receiving a fair return on the resources that belong to all Australians so that we can boost superannuation returns and cut income tax for business. No to a price on pollution, the most cost-effective means of achieving real action on climate change. And the bill before the House we're debating at the moment is their way of saying no to the National Broadband Network. It's another hollow stunt from an opposition that has more tricks than David Copperfield. You can tell it's a stunt because the member for Wentworth, Malcolm Turnbull, has refused to drop his opposition to the NBN even if cost-benefit analysis came back overwhelmingly positive about the case for the NBN. You can also tell it's a stunt because most of the information they are seeking is already on the public record. There are thousands of pages of published information on the feasibility, viability and expected commercial return of the NBN. The government has commissioned expert independent advisors, McKinsey and KPMG, to conduct a detailed implementation study of the NBN. McKinsey and KPMG undertook detailed modelling of the revenues and costs that could be expected from the project given the government's objectives. The implementation study found that the NBN could be expected to pay back the taxpayers' investment with a small return. So, before you even start to factor in any of the economic or social benefits of the NBN, there's already a positive on the cost side of the ledger. The government has also released NBN Co's corporate plan in December 2010, which showed, based on conservative assumptions, that the NBN would support uniform national wholesale prices, deliver affordable retail prices and still generate a return that exceeds the 10-year bank rate. In February 2011, we released the Greenhill-Caliburn review of the NBN's corporate plan, which found the key assumptions underlying the revenue and cost projections in the plan to be reasonable. Now there has been some work done independently of government on the benefits of the NBN. Access Economics estimated the benefits to telehealth to be between $2 billion and $4 billion a year. A study commissioned by IBM in 2009 found that a fibre-to-the-node network would, conservatively, boost the net present value of Australia's gross domestic product by between $8 and $23 billion over a 10-year period. I should point out that IBM's study considered a fibre-to-the-node network, not a fibre-to-the-home network, so we are actually talking about the value of an inferior network to the one we are now building. So there are a number of reports on the benefits, but any suggestion that you can fully quantify those benefits is just pie-in-the-sky, cloud cuckoo land thinking. It's kind of like the Postmaster General's office laying out the telephone network in the early 20th century, trying to predict the emergence of the internet. Anyone who understands broadband knows that increasing the speed gives rise to applications that could not have been contemplated before. For example, whoever thought we would have had telemedicine in days when the average internet connection was a 56k dial-up? We've seen what happens in other countries when they've tried this exercise. A recent Austrade delegation to Japan was told by the Japanese Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications that they tried to do a cost-benefit analysis on a fibre-to-the-home network. They projected the value added to the Japanese economy during the period 2011 to 2020 to be 73 trillion yen, or about 900 billion Australian dollars. Adjusting for Australia's economy, that would be about $182 billion over the same period. The study only measured the economic value to the telecommunications companies and other industries that would benefit from the high-speed network being in place. However, when they tried to go one step further and calculate the economic value of the enhancements in the everyday lives of the Japanese people, there were so many assumptions and variables involved that the process defeated them. But I'm sure Senator Birmingham, with his crystal ball and tarot cards, could show Japanese economists a thing or two about economic forecasting. I've also come across another report recently by the Allen Consulting Group. The group conducted a series of targeted focus groups with small businesses and community organisations in the NBN's mainland first release sites, Brunswick, Townsville, Kiama and Armidale. The businesses and community organisations identified a number of opportunities presented by high-speed broadband, such as the ability to sell or market their products online with a greater use of graphics, high-definition video and other multimedia. The potential for tools that enhance person-to-person visual communication to bring groups and individuals together. Profiling for television ads based on specific characteristics of the viewer's own browsing and viewing habits as a new way to market products. The use of point-of-view video technology to enhance the online shopping experiences and the development of smartphone-like applications and products. Perhaps the Coalition should have a good look at some of these reports before Mr Abbott and Mr Turnbull start wandering around the streets of Scottsdale, Smithton and Midway Point in my home state of Tasmania with a pair of bolt cutters. Why would the Coalition want to demolish and tear up the NBN? Well, it's quite simple. I think they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed because of their poor record on telecommunications in 12 years of government. They're embarrassed about the fact that not only did they develop 20 failed broadband plans throughout both government and opposition, but when Howard left office, telecommunications for consumers in remote and regional Australia had actually gone backwards. We know the opposition never had a real commitment to decent telecommunication services in rural and regional Australia when they were in government, because let's just look at their record. They destroyed services by privatising Telstra. How can you have genuine competition in the telecommunications industry when most of the infrastructure is owned by a vertically integrated private monopoly? We all know that it's hard to get true telecommunications competition in regional areas because of the cost of doing business. If we want to deliver quality, affordable services to the bush, we can't just rely on Telstra to act in the national interest. They are a private company. They have a duty to shareholders. And we certainly can't rely on a weak universal service obligation like the one the Howard government put in place. But they went ahead knowing that their actions would destroy telecommunication services in rural and regional Australia, and they should hang their heads in shame. Perhaps the Coalition will just continue their record of privatisation and sell off the optic fibre. After all, they need to sell something to help plug their $70 billion black hole. Anyway, where was their cost-benefit analysis also for the privatisation of Telstra? I didn't see anyone on that side of the chamber calling for financial transparency back then. I didn't see any Coalition members ask what that would do to Australia's homes and businesses, to our country's economic development and social inclusion. Well, I know what it did to the residents of Linawanna on Bruny Island when their public payphone was ripped out and taken away. I know what it's done to the people who complained to my office that they used to get coverage with the CDMA network and now can't get coverage with 3G. And I know what the lack of broadband infrastructure is doing when people in the remote areas of the Huon Valley contact my office and say their internet connection keeps timing out. Consumers understand the benefits of the NBN and they are voting with their feet. 88% of households are signed up for an NBN connection at the first release site near Armidale. 78% signed up in Kiama Downs, 62% in Townsville and 52% in Brunswick. Just last month, I attended a public forum held by NBN Co at Kingston Beach, one of Tasmania's second release sites. It was held at a small hall at the Kingston Beach Surf Lifesaving Club. 450 people went in and out of that hall during the day, and at times there was barely room to move. That was 400 people in the small suburb of Kingston Beach with questions about the NBN and the possibilities it can offer them in their homes, businesses and community. In fact, I noticed that so desperate are Australians to get their hands on an NBN fibre connection that Teresa Gambaro, the federal member for Brisbane, was calling for the network to be rolled out in her electorate. It appears that the member for Brisbane has broken ranks with the coalition colleagues who are calling for the NBN to be demolished. Well, the member for Brisbane knows what her constituents want, and that is true competition in telecommunications. They want access to optic fibre broadband with speeds of 100 megabits per second, or failing that, wireless and satellite broadband at speeds of 12 megabits per second. And I bet there are plenty of other coalition backbenchers who, despite being pressed into opposing the NBN, know that their constituents are clamouring to get access to it. It's about time they came clean with their constituents and say, I'm sorry, I know you want access to fast and affordable broadband, but we're not going to give you that because our policy is to tear up the NBN. Or perhaps those like the member for Brisbane should put pressure on Mr Abbott and Mr Turnbull to change their policy and commit to continuing the rollout of the NBN so that every Australian gets the fast, affordable broadband services that they deserve. But what would you expect from parties that in government sold off Telstra, as I've said, and in doing so sold out the people of rural and regional Australia and left them with second-rate telecommunication services? What can you expect when even the Nationals, who purport to stand up for regional Australia, were complicit in the dismantling of Australia's regional communications infrastructure? What can you expect from a coalition that has had 20 failed broadband plans and still can't come up with a coherent policy? Senator Birmingham, the Australian people are looking to you for a policy, and the best they can get is an 8-page stunt. And you call it the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill. Well, your motives are pretty transparent to all of us. You're obviously thinking, if we can just delay this project a little longer, perhaps we can stop Australians getting connected to the network and realising the benefit. If we can just delay this project a little longer, maybe we can buy some time and actually come up with a proper policy. Well, it's a little bit late for that. If the response I saw firsthand at the forum at Kingston Beach is anything to go by, Australians want this network. And against the tide of Australians signing up for fast, affordable broadband, the federal coalition are like stunned deer caught in headlights. Now, I know Senator Birmingham must have had a few minutes spare while he was waiting for his plane to board at Canberra Airport, and I reckon if I popped down to the lounge I could probably find a coaster with Senator Birmingham's bill written on the back of it. But real policy is not just about the opposition's favourite pastime, opposing things. That's your favourite pastime. It's actually about proposing a constructive alternative, and that's what you fail to do on that side all the time. Not 20 alternatives. We don't want 20. We're just happy with one, as long as it's decent and reasonable. So if you want some free advice on that side, I'd say that this is a pretty sorry excuse for a private senator's bill. Get together with your colleague Mr Turnbull and put at least the same amount of time into coming up with a broadband policy. Or if that's all a bit too hard, maybe you could get on and support ours. After all, the rest of Australia has. And I notice Senator Bushby's here, and I think Senator Bushby and the Tasmanian senators are very aware of what opposing the NBN, what results that has for those on the other side in the last federal election. And I think I'm surprised that they haven't got the courage to stand up to Mr Abbott and to Mr Turnbull and say, we need this NBN. In fact, this bill shows that the only people left in Australia that oppose and don't support fast, affordable broadband are the federal opposition. Well, it's not a bad dream. I know it's taking you a bit of time to adapt, but yes, you are actually living in the 21st century. Might take you a bit of time to get used to it, but I would strongly encourage you all on that side to try and get used to it and to move with the times and to acknowledge the benefits of NBN to the whole of society, as I said, in regard to education, e-health, social inclusion and the range of other areas that will make a huge difference to the people of Australia, not just the people in cities but also to rural and regional Australians.
Senator Nash.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy President. I thoroughly enjoyed, colleagues, the contribution from Senator Billick. Then it was really a bit of a hoot, wasn't it? I particularly liked the bit when, on the other side of the chamber, they are taking it upon themselves to proffer our side of the chamber advice, which I find really quite extraordinary, colleagues, given the inept nature of the current Labor government. But I shan't waste time on that. We're here today to debate the National Broadband Network Financial Transparency Bill. And I do find interesting from Senator Billick's contribution that on no occasion did she actually try and defend her government on the basis of why will they not inform the Australian people properly about the business case for an NBN, and a cost-benefit analysis. On no occasion did Senator Billick or anybody else on the other side that have been listened to actually give a good reason why the Australian people shouldn't be fully informed about the National Broadband Network. Because what this bill does, very ably and capably put forward by Senator Birmingham, and I must acknowledge Senator Birmingham's diligent work and thorough understanding of telecommunications issues, he's put forward a very sensible bill. I actually think it's one of the most sensible bills we've seen before us in this place for quite some time. Because what it does, Madam Acting Deputy President, it does two things. It requires the publication of a 10-year business case for the NBN, and also to refer the NBN project to the Productivity Commission for a thorough cost-benefit analysis. How sensible is that? I think that is absolutely what the government should have been doing anyway. Can you imagine, colleagues, if we pop down to our bank, our local bank, and have a chat to the bank manager with an idea that we'd had for a new business venture, and we'd said to the bank manager, we've got this really good idea. We think we've got this great idea. Well, what's it going to cost? Says the bank manager. Not really sure. Got a bit of a ballpark figure, but not really sure. So I can't tell you. And how's it actually going to work? How's it going to operate? Sorry, not really sure, can't tell you, but it is a really good idea. Bank manager then says, well, who's it going to service? How many people is this going to impact upon? What's your return going to be? How long is it going to take? We say to the bank manager, actually, really sorry, not sure about any of those things, but it's a really, really good idea, and bank manager, all I need from you is a bucket of money, so that'd be great, thanks. Absolute pie-in-the-sky stuff. And yet, that is exactly what this government has done. They have come up with, Senator Conroy has come up with a bucket of money. Because that's all it is, colleagues. It is an unsubstantiated, unworked through bucket of money. So, having got this bucket of money from the bank manager, the minister is now endeavouring to try and control this beast that is really becoming out of control. And what is the minister thinking? That he thinks it's okay not to inform the Australian people about how this NBN is going to work? Now, if that doesn't smack of the arrogance of this Labor government at this point in time, as they have been for some time now, it's just extraordinary. And if it wasn't so serious, it would actually be funny, because they are completely inept. Completely inept. Now, why is it that this government will not put forward a business case and do a cost-benefit analysis? Because they know it's going to all turn into a pile of very interesting arrangement, because they know that if they try and actually explain properly to the Australian people how this is going to work, either A, they can't, or B, it is going to look so bad. So they're hiding. They're actually hiding. Well, it's one of two things. They're either hiding because they know it's going to be so bad, or they simply don't know. They simply don't know how this is all going to unravel. It's a bit like letting a train loose on a track without a train driver and saying, well, it's off to a destination somewhere. We're not quite sure what that destination's going to be or what the impact's going to be along the way. But, the train's on the track and it's rolling. This side of the chamber, we in the coalition have always supported faster, better telecommunications for the Australian people. But we also, unlike the other side, have supported doing it responsibly, have supported doing it sensibly, and not coming up with some bucket of money of taxpayers' dollars to put towards some project that has no cost-benefit analysis and has no business case. It's just stupid. It's just stupidity. And I think if that is the way this government is running the country, which obviously it is, it reflects really badly on this government's ability to substantially and properly determine policy for the future of the country. because they simply can't do it. They simply have no ability whatsoever to do it. So I think Senator Birmingham's bill is one that should absolutely be passed by this chamber. And I can't understand anybody not supporting this. It is just sensible. It is just sensible. And I know that Senator Lundy will have a different point of view, because her party has to have a different point of view. And I do acknowledge Senator Lundy's very real understanding of these issues. She has a very significant knowledge and capability in this area. And I think probably asked, in a corner of a room somewhere, do you really think the NBN is going as well as it could, and should it really be like this? I suspect that Senator Lundy might have a few thoughts about how maybe it could have been done differently, but I certainly wouldn't want to put any words in her mouth whatsoever. But what's going to be interesting, colleagues, is to see if the Greens and the Independents support the government on this bill. This is going to be very interesting indeed, because all this bill does is ask the government to be responsible and to ask the government to provide the Australian people with the information they deserve about the national broadband network. Because at the end of the day, this is not about a bucket of money of over $50 billion, colleagues. I mean, it's a bit hard to get your head around that. I know the government says, well, it's not over $50 billion, it's only $36 billion. But they very neatly refused to include the $11 billion that went to Telstra and the cost overruns that are very likely to be predicted, because, of course, colleagues, we only have to look at things like the Building the Education Revolution program to know that the government can't manage money, and there's always waste and mismanagement when it comes to this government, so you need to actually factor that in. There is not this bucket of money. There is not $50 billion sitting in a giant bucket underneath the Parliament House, although you think the way Senator Conroy is going on that there is. This is Australian people's money. This is taxpayers' dollars. This is money that taxpayers of Australia have provided. Although I may correct myself there and say, with $198 billion worth of debt that this government has now given the Australian people, it's probably far more likely it's coming from somewhere else. But it's interesting that what will the Greens and the Independents do? Because all this does, as I say, is ask the government to be responsible and to provide the Australian people with the information they deserve when it comes to the government spending $50 billion. If the Greens support the government on this, we can only assume that it's another occasion of the operation of the Labor Green government, because by and large, that's what we've got now. We've got the Labor Greens government, and I think there's no greater example of that than yesterday in this place, when we were discussing the cap to the childcare rebate, the fact that there was going to be increased cost to families around childcare. Senator Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens, who in the past had said there should not be any extra impost on families, the government shouldn't be using this as a savings measure, voted with the government to increase childcare costs for families. Now, if that isn't the best example of the fact that this is a Labor Greens government and there is no other way of looking at it, then I don't know what it is. And I expect, I could be wrong, colleagues, I could be wrong. I expect that today, in this chamber, we'll see the Labor Greens government voting together, voting as one. Again, I hope I'm proved wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong, that the Greens in fact do realise that this is doing nothing more than asking the government to ask responsibly, which they certainly haven't managed to do in the past. And I must say I have been a little disengaged from telecommunications issues over recent times, but I thought it was timely to perhaps make a contribution today, and as I did last night with Senator Birmingham in the committee stage, because it's really important for the future of this nation that we do get telecommunications right. And I suspect that the current minister isn't getting it right. And I suspect that many people across the country would say $50 billion. OK, how about if some of that went to telecommunications? And if the government's got a bucket of money of $50 billion, how about we put that to some other infrastructure use, or maybe put that to some health infrastructure? Because let me tell you, when I'm out there in the regional communities talking to people, it is appalling, the level of health service that is given to regional Australia. But no, the government's hell-bent on this NBN, and it's extraordinary. It's a bit like watching a slow train wreck in a lot of ways. Look, I could be wrong. We could come back in 20 years and say, gee, isn't it fantastic, the NBN's gone brilliantly. But not being a sooth, I can't tell. Not having a crystal ball, I don't know. But I suspect that we would be standing there going, what an absolute disastrous mess that turned out to be. Because picking technologies is not smart. That's probably the understatement of the year. And while, of course, there has to be capacity in the backhaul through the fibre, I do not disagree with that one little bit. And that actually should be addressed. And that is key. That is key to the provision of better services in regional Australia. But for the government to prescribe how it will work from that point on to the home is just stupidity. It is just absolute stupidity. And I note that even this morning, just as early as this morning, NBN Co has admitted that wireless internet services in some areas could be comparable to the basic speed of basic services on Labor's fibre network. So it is just extraordinary that the government is continuing down this track. Now, before I came into this place, seems a very long time ago now, way back in 2005, Senator Joyce and I, not actually being in this place at that time, but both senators-elect, were asked to co-chair a regional telecommunications inquiry for the Page Research Centre, chaired by Dr Troy Whitford, who I must say is an extraordinary intellect. He does indeed have a brain the size of a planet. And we worked together with the industry to come up with a plan for future-proofing telecommunications in non-metropolitan Australia. And I actually think we came up with some pretty good ideas, bearing in mind, colleagues, this is over 6 years ago now. And while I admit that there are many of my colleagues that perhaps didn't agree with what we put forward, it was a really sensible plan. Because what it did, it said competition where it can, absolutely, is the vehicle to provide the best telecommunications services for the Australian people. But where there is market failure, the government does have a role to play in ensuring that those areas have an equity of service when it comes to telecommunications. And I note, and when the minister started talking about this NBN, I had some sympathy for some of the principles in that they aligned with that. But what he's ended up with is this absolute NBN beast that virtually has morphed into an entirely different being than the one of the principle that he started with. And I actually think what we came up with back in those days, and I notice my good colleague Senator Joyce has joined me now, I actually think we came up with a pretty good plan, at that point. And I'm sure my good friend and colleague Senator Ronaldson will again refer to me as an agrarian socialist, and he's taken to calling me Black Nash McEwen. But I think, thank you, Senator Joyce. I'll take that interjection. He's just indicated it's a compliment. But there is a role for government to play in ensuring that there is equity of services in telecommunications where we have market failure. But that is not what the government has given us. That is nothing like what the government has given us. So instead of actually look at the urban areas and say, well, what regulatory reform can we put in place to actually assist competition in the cities where that's going to have the best possible outcome, where that's going to provide the best services. Oh no, he's just taken the giant slam, gone straight to the top and gone for the giant U-Butte super duper model that is going to be completely out of control. My great fear is once we go through all of this entire process with the NBN Co and the dealings with Telstra that we've seen and where it's all morphing to, is that in a lot of ways we're going to end up at exactly the same point we started. And that would indeed be a very, very sad day for telecommunications, because regional communities are still being left behind. All of this talk, all of this bluster, everything from this government, regional communities are still being left behind. And I note that Senator Bilyk earlier was waxing lyrical in her speech about Armidale and the connection. It was waxing lyrical, it was. You had some fantastic phrases in there, Senator Bilyk. I've got to say, I'd love to know where you came up with them. But waxing lyrical about Armidale. Now, I'm not quite sure who gave Senator Bilyk her information about Armidale, but I can assure you, colleagues, the number of people that have connected in Armidale, number of people, what you'd think maybe Armidale's big. What was the population of Armidale, Senator Joyce? 25,000. You think there'd be a pretty significant proportion, wouldn't you? Okay, 25,000. You think maybe 10,000, maybe 5. Less than 50 people in Armidale have connected. So I would suggest, Senator Bilyk, that perhaps maybe you go back to your speech and have a little look at that particular bit. Less than 50 people. This bill today does nothing more, as I said earlier, than require the government to act responsibly. And I do notice in Senator Birmingham's second reading speech, he says, and I quote, "It will give Parliament much greater comfort if that transparency, indeed the transparency of the NBN, if that transparency is a statutory requirement rather than simply a promise from the executive." And I think he's spot on that one, because we know what this government is like with promises, don't we, colleague? Now, let me see. What is the most recent promise I can think of that was broken? Or the biggest one anyway? Oh, I know. It was that the Prime Minister said, Julia Gillard, before the last election, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. There will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. And what have we got now? What have we got now, colleagues? We are looking down the barrel of a carbon tax. Now, I notice Senator Lundy's making a contribution from the other side for the first time, and I think the government's a little sensitive about this, because they know that there is nowhere they can hide. There is nowhere they can hide. It was a promise that was made to the Australian people, and it was broken. There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. So it's not surprising that the Australian people do not believe the minister, Senator Conroy, when he says, just trust me. Just trust me, it'll be fine. The NBN will be fine. We don't need a business case. We don't need a cost-benefit analysis. It'll be fine. You just trust us. The Australian people are smarter than that, and they deserve better than that. And they deserve to have the business case and the cost-benefit analysis that's been put forward through Senator Birmingham's bill. It's just common sense. It is just common sense that that sort of information would be available. It is just common sense that the Australian people would be able to have access to the information that they rightly deserve about how the NBN is going to work. Because, let me tell you, colleagues, this whole trust us thing just doesn't cut it. The $50 billion that this government is going to spend needs to be plainly and clearly explained to the Australian people how it's going to work. Now, the government should stop hiding, or the government should stop completely negating the need for this, because it's quite extraordinary to watch. So, on this side of the chamber, of course, we understand that it needs to be done. We need better telecommunications, and especially in regional Australia, and Senator Joyce and I have been saying that for years and years. But we've got to do it responsibly and sensibly, and do it informing the Australian people of what we're going to do about the outcomes they need and they deserve.
Thank you, Senator Nash. Senator Joyce.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. I think it's really important to understand exactly where we're going with this bill. This bill is basically to bring about transparency, to let the light in, because apparently we're told that the Labor Party has complete confidence in where the NBN's off to. They believe that certain members of their backbench are doing a fine job, and they've got absolute confidence in what they're doing. So this poses the question to the Australian people that we have to make absolutely certain that we get transparency in some of these crucial issues. Now, what we have here is the largest capital investment in the history of our nation, the largest. And it was never done with a cost-benefit analysis. It is just the most absurd concept to think that we could go down this path without clearly knowing what we were about to do. Now, I had an older brother, I still have him, he was great, and he remains a great bloke. His name's Michael. And Michael loved music. He was always buying the latest form of record player, whatever it was. We started with the old, I don't know what it was, some heap of junk parked in the corner of the lounge room, and onto that went the Deep Purple records and Cream and a whole heap of Beatles albums, and that was what it was. And Mike was always buying the latest stereo. I remember once he made a large investment in this record player that played a vinyl record, and it actually had two needles, two stylus on either side. It was incredible. It absolutely could play both sides of the record. You didn't have to turn it over. Amazing. That technology lasted for about 6 or 7 months, and then they invented this new piece of technology. It was a CD player. These things were so expensive. That was going to be the end. There'll be nothing beyond. There'll be nothing beyond the CD player. That's as good as it gets. So a CD player is what people bought. Now I look at what my daughter's got at the moment, MP3 players and iPods, they're about this big. Now what we've got with the Labor Party, what they've done is we've got a $56 billion ultimate investment in what will be vinyl. They're investing in the vinyl record player. They have no concept about where this is actually going to go. Now, we understand backhaul. Yes, you're going to have backhaul. Fibre backhaul makes a lot of sense to the node. But the world is racing ahead, and it's racing ahead with such technology as wireless, yet you are locked into a form of technology which the Australian people have to underwrite. And as you know, that vinyl record player now is completely and utterly worthless. It is a relic. It is something for a museum. And I do not want to see our nation's investment being something for a museum, because it becomes more then of the debt that this nation has to pay for. That's right. We currently have $197 billion in debt, and we're about to go in this mad frolic. Every day we find the minister come down here and tell us about the wonders of the NBN. I have heard that at this point in time they have 50 customers. They've cracked the half century. 50 customers. That's great. So it's in excess of a $50 billion all-up capital cost by the time you take in the leases and into the future of the product. So at this point in time, it's about $1 billion a customer. That's value for money. That's reasonable. That's reasonable. This is a sign of a government that's got it all together. And then we also had that fiasco in Armidale, where we had Mr. Windsor came up on Ms Gillard's jet, Mr. Richard Torbay, the Independent. They all stood up there and they couldn't go up to the university because the university's download speed was actually faster than what the internet could provide, the NBN could provide. So they formulated this whole sort of stage event. It was like Shakespeare had come to Armidale. Shakespeare had come to Armidale in the form of the opening of the NBN. And you remember the photo, they're all there with the big smiley cheesy grins, and they all put their hands together and they pressed the button and the lights went on. They had 7 customers. Seven. And what was really interesting is the 7 customers were already on. So what happened when they pressed that button? What was the button pressing all about? Because the customers were already there. It's just a metaphor of how completely and utterly unbelievable they are. And this is the same sort of unbelievability you get when you hear them say they're doing a fine job, when they have absolute confidence, when the member will be there for a long, long, long time. It's just that there's nothing that we can really trust anymore. With this sort of money, if we were making this sort of investment, there are things that I don't think are going to get outdated, such as ports. They don't get outdated. Rail, strategic rail, inland rail, roads. These are the sort of investments that deliver our nation and take it forward. But we've compromised all this because we've blown our money on a technology that could so quickly become out of date. And the other thing is, we're buying ourselves a telephone company, a little old telephone company. The problem is we've already got a couple of them. So what is this about? How did we get ourselves once more into this position? One of the promises the Labor Party made with this was the promise that the regional areas, because Mr Windsor and Mr Oakeshott, this is why they put these economic luminaries in power, they would give us uniform pricing. The National Party believes in uniform pricing, absolutely. We believe in it so much we moved an amendment to make sure that our people got it, where we said, okay, what are we actually pricing here? Are we pricing the name? What are we pricing? Are we pricing the service? What is the essence of the service? The essence of the service is download speed. That is it, because that's what it's all about. So we said, well, if it's uniform pricing, let's make it genuine uniform pricing and have unit pricing on download speed across the nation. That would be honouring the commitment. Because see, what these sneaky people did is they've set up 3 pricing silos. They have the fibre pricing silo, that is for urban Australia. They have the wireless pricing silo, that is for regional Australia. And they have the satellite pricing silo, that is for remote Australia. And you're going to find this hard to believe, they're all different prices. They're all different prices. Now, I thought that Mr Windsor, being the honourable person, I know he's honourable because he wears elastic-sided boots, the honourable person would have stood up and said, that's outrageous. I gave you government. I demand unit pricing. I demand what I asked for. But no, he didn't vote for it. No, something else was on that day. So he didn't vote for it. Mr Oakeshott, I thought he would...
Order. Time for debate has expired under the pursuant to standing orders.